You crack. Let's get shucking. I mean,
That's shucking
this
day.
is the time for you all to get out your oyster kit because we're getting closer to learning how to shuck oysters. For everyone else who doesn't like seafood that much or allergic, you have some awesome Old Bay chips, cheese, and charcuterie to enjoy, or
Right.
join crack in shucking some pistachios. I love pistachios.
What you
I
doing?
think that anything you can shuck, it's up to me. It's for me. So my name is Rifko Meyer. I am your oyster chef. I'm from Amsterdam, and that's why the accent. And so maybe sometimes you don't understand quite what I'm saying. I don't guss. So if you think I guss, I say something weird in English and everything. And so I encourage you to raise your hand in the system for questions or for suggestions, because from now on, I am your oyster concierge and I answer all the questions. There is no good, bad, or crazy questions. I've experienced everything already. So don't worry, ask me, and probably I have a big smile on my face as like, been there, done that. Let's prevent it from doing it next time. So in front of me, I have actually the platter that you guys all got, the ones that love the seafood with the condiments. And you can see a little bit how I dressed it up. The oysters, of course, I didn't, it's organic lemons. I didn't cut them for you. I'm sorry, but I thought that they would be a little bit dry when they would arrive to you. But for the rest, everything is ready. So please get that ready, set it up. If you didn't do it already, raise hands when you say like, okay, Rivko, slow down, I need to do this. Before we teach you the 5 simple steps of shucking an oyster, and it's literally super simple. People look at me after they shuck their second oyster and say, okay, that first oyster was not beginner's luck. So that's how easy it's going to be. But before we get there, I want to go over which oysters to eat and which oysters to toss. Very important, because the ones that you toss, you don't want to eat because it will cost you like a diet of 3 days in your bathroom. So we want to prevent that one. Oysters to toss. Oysters come straight out of the water at the oyster farm, and they have 2 muscles. And watch this. I love playing around to be an oyster. And so an oyster comes out of the water and has 2 muscles, the ones that we're going to shuck, and 2 muscles, and it will keep the shells closed to keep the ocean water in. While it sits there, the oyster stays alive and stays fresh. As long as there's water inside of the oyster is alive. So when the water is out, because he got curious and opened up on their way, or it dried out because of the sun or anything like that, that's when the oyster opens up, because it cannot use the muscles anymore because it dies. When the oyster doesn't have water anymore, it dies and it doesn't use the muscles and it opens up. So every oyster that opens up by itself, don't give it to your partner and say, oh, here's an oyster for you, I don't have to shuck it even. No. You want to toss that one. You see in restaurants often that they do a knocking test. If you knock 2 oysters on top of each other, they need to sound like 2 rocks on top of each other. If it sounds hollow, at least one of the oysters is going to be open and therefore dead. And you want to toss the open one. Don't toss the wrong one, because that one you want to eat. Then an oyster that you open and it smells like French cheese. I love French cheese, but not in my oyster. So if you open it up and it smells like French cheese, well, you even want to bag it, because that's not a nice flavor to eat. It's natural, it's a bacteria, it's algae, but it could cause you a little diet as well. So 2 oysters that we really want to toss: the ones that are open, simple, because you can see it's open, and the one that when you open it, it smells. Because oysters need to smell like oceans because they are from the ocean. So that's always good to remember. Then when you receive the oysters, I like to clean my oysters a little bit, just like I clean my mushrooms, just like my strawberries. So I toss them in the sink, toss them a little bit around with the cold water, and then take them out. And I put them actually in the mesh bag that was in the package as well, and the plastic bag. And the plastic bag protects the oyster from drying out, because the fridge likes to dry out your food. Remember your cheese, you put it in a plastic bag to avoid drying out. Your veggies or your herbs, the same. And so with your oysters, you want to wrap it and be airtight as well. Airtight. But Rifko, how do the oysters breathe? Oysters don't breathe once they are out of the water. And so you don't have to worry about that. You can put them in an airtight plastic bag, and this way the oysters keep the water, the ocean water, in the inside longer. And this way the oysters can keep for at least a week. A week? Yeah. Well, why would you want to have it for a week? Because you need to eat them. Lunch, I just heard from Craig that we can actually drink for lunch. So drink for lunch, eat oysters for lunch. Work hasn't been as good ever. Beautiful. And so in that sense, pick some out of the fridge while they're there, or wait for the whole family to come in. Any questions for that? If we don't have any questions for that, do I see a hand at Rob McCall? Guys, no? So let's go to the 5 steps of shucking an oyster. Are you ready? Do you have the oyster shucker, the towel, and the oysters close to you? Yeah, perfect. I'm gonna change this because it gives me a little bit more space. And I'm gonna change the camera position at some point so that you can see a little bit better how I do it. So first of all, we need the towel. The towel is gonna protect our hand from the oyster shucker, but also gonna protect us from the side of the oysters. The oysters can be a little bit sharp, especially the Rhode Island oysters can be a little bit sharp on the edges. So you wanna have protection for your hand, and the towel is fantastic. I'm Dutch, so I chose to do a Dutch towel. In the Rhode Island, like Rifko, what did you do in the Rhode Island idea? And well, I didn't have to do anything. The oysters do everything for me. I say oysters bring you to places by just eating them. How come? Well, remember, oysters come out of the ocean, and they taste like the ocean, and so they taste like the ocean in Rhode Island. And I heard already someone saying, like in the video, that the seafood in Rhode Island is famous because it's so beautiful salt and so beautiful water. Exactly. That's why the oysters are amazing. And so every oyster you taste, whether you are in Nashville or in Miami or in Los Angeles, you all will have the same flavor in your mouth, and that's Rhode Island. So you kind of feel that you're traveling to Rhode Island while eating the oyster. So take the towel and then fold the towel in half and fold it in half again. So you have like a quarter of the towel, and you put it on your non-dominant hand, like so, non-dominant hand. Then you have the oyster shucker. Your oyster shucker has 2 fingerprints. You put your thumb and your index finger on the fingerprints, and you want to leave it there because this will give you leverage, because I don't want you to use any strength in the 5 steps of shucking the oyster, because that's the fun about this technique. You really don't have to use any strength. So make sure, towel on your non-dominant hand, fingers on the fingerprints. I will repeat this one a few more times because I'm a very old-fashioned teacher. And so now we're gonna go to the oyster. We take one of the oysters, make sure that it's closed, of course, and then look at the oyster. An oyster has a cup side and a flat side. And the cup side always goes on the bottom. Why? Because if we crack the hinge, this is the hinge, the pointy part. If we crack the hinge, we want the water to stay in the oyster, because the oyster is the gravy of the oyster. and it's your taste of Rhode Island. So make sure that the cup side is always down, the flat side on top. So now I'm going to change camera positions to show you how I hold the oyster in my hands. But, and don't try this at home, kids, I'm not using a towel because I want you to see how I hold the oyster in the palm of my hand. Please, you all keep that towel there. I will repeat myself later on, but make sure that you have the towel to protect yourself for if anything goes wrong. Promise me also, don't use any strength in any of the 5 steps and keep your fingers on the fingerprints. Here we go. How to hold the oyster in your hands. So I put the cup side down, the hinge pointing towards myself, and I wrap my fingers around it with my thumb on top, like so. My pinky does the British tea drinking pinky. You can do whatever you do with your pinky. You can wrap it or anything. My pinky loves to drink tea like a Brit. And so this is how you hold the oyster in all the steps. Now, you have your knife. And remember, I don't have the towel. You guys should look like this. So step number 1 is making a lollipop. Remember, it's 5 simple steps. Step number 1 is a lollipop. A lollipop you make by putting the point of the knife into the hinge, gently pulling your oyster hand towards yourself, and pushing your oyster knife hand away and jiggling left and right. You don't use any strength. You just pull, push, and jiggle. It's like a little bit like a dance. Pull, push, and jiggle. Pull, push, and jiggle. And so when you do that, the oyster will start sticking on the top of your knife like this. And you can knock on other oysters to see if it sticks. If it doesn't stick, like now, then you do it again. And you put the point of the knife into the hinge until it sticks nicely. A lollipop, the lollipop is the most important step. So you really want to take a little bit of time. That's why I'm delaying. The people that already have a lollipop are thinking like, Rifko, can we move on? I know. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Don't worry. It's super easy, especially if you don't use any strength and you keep your fingers on the fingerprints. Pull, push, and jiggle. And as soon as you have a good lollipop, you're basically home free. So the next step is cracking the hinge. Cracking the hinge, step number 2, is by turning the knife like a key in a lock, like left and right. So I turn left and I turn right, gently, very gently. If it doesn't open, don't worry. We go back to step number 1 and we push, pull, and jiggle a little bit more. It goes in deeper. And you want to do this very gentle. Rhode Island oysters are a little bit brittle. So if you use too much strength, it will break easily. So that's a good test. If you break it, get a new one and you try without that much strength. So now I'm turning again, left and right, doesn't go open. Now it opens. Step number 3 is cutting the top muscle. The top muscle is 2/3 up and a little bit to the right. So the muscle is at 2 o'clock, 2/3 up and a little bit on the right. So we're gonna go in with the point of the knife against the top shell because we wanna scrape the point against the top shell because we don't wanna pinch the oyster. The oyster is kind of like a grape. And so we don't want to pinch that grape because then it doesn't splash in our mouth anymore when we chew it. So we're gonna go in 2/3 up. And then when we're 2/3 up with the knife, we windshield wipe to the right. And this is why your fingers are here, so that the knife doesn't come out. So when you cut, you don't let the knife go out because then you use the thumb of your knife hand to pick up the top shell. And sometimes the oysters leave a little bit extra shell in there. And so you want to take that out, or if they leave a little bit debris, every debris that you see, you take out and you clean your knife. Step number 4 is cutting the bottom muscle. The bottom muscle is 2/3 up and a little bit to the right. You can actually see it right here. Do you see your muscle? Well, now you turn your knife, your oyster hand into your body because you want that mussel right in front of you. And this way, you can easily sever the mussel by going underneath the oyster and scraping the knife underneath the mussel, and you cut it like this. Step number 5 is very easy. Oysters like to connect to the hinge a little bit to not get seasick when they're in the water. So you want to give it a little pinch from the hinge and see if there's any debris there. And if there's no debris there, then we're ready to oyster cheers. Salud. Enjoy. Everybody, how's everybody doing? This is the first oyster only, eh? Like what wasn't this pretty easy? I see a lot of happy faces. I like that. I don't see any ambulances yet. No, kidding. And if there's still a little debris in it, you can just take it out, of course. Let's do another one. Make sure that you have the fingers on the fingerprints, the cup side down, the oyster in the palm of your hand. Make sure that you have your towel underneath it. And then fingers on the fingerprints. Just put the point where the hinge is. Anywhere is good. You could also do it a little bit on the side, but I like symmetry. I like it to be like a little bit like a nice lollipop. So I kind of always go in the straight way. But if you want to be a little bit crooked on the side or anything, that's fine too. So wrap your fingers around it, thumb on top, and then pull, push, and jiggle. Make sure that you don't turn that knife, because turning that knife will make your knife budge. So pull, like this, and you have a lollipop. The less strength you use, the easier it gets. Like this. Perfect. Step number 2 is cracking the hinge by turning the knife like a key in a lock, left and right. Some oysters like to open left, and some oysters like to open right. Step number 3, cutting the top mussel. The top mussel 2/3 up and a little bit to the right. So I go in with the point against the top shell. I can clean my knife a little bit. And then when I'm there and I feel that mussel right here, I windshield wipe to the right. Windshield wipe to the right. Then I pick it up like this and can put it away. If you see any debris, you take it away already. Step number 4, cutting the bottom mussel. The bottom mussel is 2/3 up and a little bit to the right. You can actually see it here. Now you turn your oyster hand towards yourself like this, and you sever the mussel underneath it. Make sure that you don't pinch that oyster again. And step 5, it's kind of like to make the oyster nice and clean and pretty. And sometimes oysters like to stick. And so like you want to help it a little bit so that when you eat it, it doesn't get stuck in the shell and you look like helpless, tilting it into your mouth. And this is how you shuck an oyster again. And the best part of teaching this class always is that I get to eat all the oysters. Let me tell you a little bit about delicious, the flavor and the freshness. Freshness. Oysters come out of the water and have water inside. So when you open an oyster, it needs to be nice and moist. There needs water to be water inside. That's a fresh oyster. The oyster needs to be plump. Plump means that there's ocean water inside of the oyster. And it smells like ocean water. So that's when you open an oyster, that's what you're looking for. But you can also use that in restaurants, of course. When you get a platter of oysters and it looks like a little bit slippery and everything, then in that sense, you don't want to touch it too much. And then also, when you're looking at the oysters of the Rhode Island, of course, you can actually recognize the flavors of the water there. The oysters there are from cold water and in the ocean. So they should be nice and briny because the ocean is super briny. And they're a little bit minerally. There's not an abundance of flavor, and that's the temperature of the ocean. because when the ocean is a little bit colder, less flavors will be in there because there's less plants and less animals in there. And so you really want to see what the flavors there is. So now that you know how to shuck, and if anybody has a questions about that, please interrupt me. But how do I go about my oysters when I'm done? Very simple. All the oysters that you didn't eat, you collect them again and you put them back into the mesh bag and back into the plastic bag, airtight. You put them in the fridge and you have a perfect little snack tomorrow for the lunch with a glass of wine, or even on Friday, Saturday for brunch. You shuck and impress your friends a little bit. So amazing. Before I give it over to Brian, I do want to share a little bit of how amazing it is that you guys now know how to shuck oysters. Oysters make the oceans healthier, clearer. They filter the water, 40, 50 gallons of water from the ocean, and that makes the ocean more clear. This allows the sun to go deeper in the ocean, and more life will grow deeper in the ocean. So I always say, every oyster that you eat, you donate to a healthier ocean. Whew, that is fantastic. Next to that, it's super healthy for you, abundance of zinc and minerals and vitamins. So it really is a beautiful product there. And so like there's no reason to continue enjoying oysters. Order them from the farms directly so that you have the freshest oysters. And if you have any questions, always reach out. Make sure that any questions are answered that you would have. Now, I'm going to throw it back to Brian, who is live at the HGTV Dream Home in Rhode Island.